In today's class, we'll be learning about the steps of the scientific method. I know right now you're probably thinking, what is the scientific method? Well, the scientific method involves a series of steps that are used to investigate a natural occurrence. Today we'll be taking a closer look at the steps of the scientific method you will need to understand before you start the science project. There are 7 steps to the scientific method. The first step is stating a problem and question. Second step would be observation and research. Third step is form a hypothesis. The fourth step is to do an experiment. The fifth step is to collect and analyze results. Your sixth step is to conclusion. And the seventh step is communicate your results. The first step is to develop a question or problem that can be solved through experiments. The second step is observation and research. Make an observation and research your topic of interest. We've already went over the first 2 steps. Now can you remember the next step? If you said hypotheses, you are correct. The third step is to form a hypothesis. Predict a possible answer to the problem or question. Example, if soil temperatures rise, then the plant growth will increase. The fourth step is experiment. Develop and follow a procedure. Include a detailed materials list. The outcome must be measurable. The fifth step is collect and analyze results. Modify the procedure if needed. Confirm the results by retesting, including tables, graphs, and photographs. The sixth step is conclusion. Include a statement that accepts or rejects the hypotheses. Making recommendations for further study and possible improvements to the procedure. The final step is to communicate the results. Be prepared to present the project to an audience. Expect questions from the audience. Now I'm going to give you an example of a scientific method. John watches his grandmother bake bread. He asks his grandmother, what makes the bread rise? She explains the yeast releases a gas as it feeds on sugar. John wonders if the amount of sugar used in the recipe will affect the size of bread. John researches the areas of baking and tries to come up with a way to test his question. Keeps all of his information on this topic in a journal. John talks with his teacher and she gives him an experimental design diagram to help him set up his investigation. After talking with his teacher and conducting further research, he comes up with a hypothesis. If more sugar is added, then the bread will rise higher. The hypothesis is an educated guess about the relationship between the independent and dependent variables. Do you know the difference between independent and dependent variables? The independent variable is a factor that is initially varied by the person doing the experiment. The dependent or responding variable is a factor that may change as a result of changes made in the independent variable. In this case, it would be the size of the loaf of bread. His teacher helps him come up with a procedure and a list of needed materials. She discusses with John how to determine the control group. In a scientific experiment, the control is the group that serves as a standard of comparison. The control group is exposed to the same conditions as the experimental group, except for the variable being tested. All experiments should have a control group. John writes out his procedure for his experiment along with the materials list in his journal. He has both of these checked by his teacher where she checks for any safety concerns. Trials refer to replicate groups that are exposed to the same conditions in the experiment. John is going to test each sugar variable 3 times. Collect and analyze results. John comes up with a table he can use to record his data. John gets all of his materials together and carries out with his experiment. This is the table John will be using for his experiment. John examines his data and notices that his control worked the best in the experiment, but not significantly better than 100 grams of sugar. John rejects his hypothesis but decides to retest using sugar amounts between 50 grams and 100 grams. John finds that 70 grams of sugar produces the largest loaf. His hypothesis is accepted. Communicating the results. John tells his grandmother about his findings and prepares to present his project in the science class. Observe your world and come up with a question to answer using the scientific method.